I'm Marty Rosenberg. For 4 years, the Grid Talk podcast has conducted more than 100 interviews with key innovators, business leaders, and policymakers in the energy sector. That was done on behalf of the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Electricity. I am now joining with EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, to bring you a series of new Grid Talk podcasts exploring where the electric grid is now heading. Hi, welcome back to Grid Talk. We're very excited for the first conversation in this new iteration of our podcast to have Gil Quiniones, the president and CEO of one of the most important utilities in the country, ComEd, serving Chicago and Northern Illinois. Hi, Gil. How are you?
Great, Marty. Good to be with you as always.
Okay, so let's jump right in because we've got lots to talk about. There's been a lot going on in the industry when we last checked in with each other. Massive amount of spending was planned, hundreds of billions of dollars on the grid by the previous administration. There's been a sea change in approach to energy on the federal level. But a lot of the needs that you and I have talked about over the years for a robust, secure, modern grid have escalated. They haven't even been static. So I'd like to talk to you about what ComEd sees going on, and I understand there's some exciting plans afoot to address it that our audience will be keyed in on because it puts you in the first tier of utilities in the country getting ready for the future. So Gil, let's talk about the ComEd grid as it is today and what you see as the main challenges that it faces.
Well, Marty, I think the energy landscape in Northern Illinois here in our service territory at ComEd is going through a profound change. The last time you and I were talking about our industry, load has been flat 10, 15 years ago. And now we're seeing a rapid growth in load due to data centers, reshoring of manufacturing, electrification. And we're also seeing a change in the generation supply mix. There are retirements of old fossil fuel getting replaced by renewables and batteries. A lot of changes in technology when it comes to the grid, from advances in material science, advances in computing and sensors and power electronics. It's really very different at this point. But most importantly, for our customers, we need to make sure that we continue to provide safe, reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy to our customers. So the before and after is a completely different picture. I predict that there will be more changes in our grid over the next 10 years than over the last 118 years of existence of ComEd.
So let's talk about what those changes are going to be. Let's focus on EVs for a second. You have close to 100,000 EVs in your service territory, and it's up dramatically from just 5 years ago, fivefold. Do you see that growing, and how is your infrastructure adapting to that?
I think it's going to continue to grow despite changes of the incentives at the federal level. Maybe the rate of change will differ a little bit, but we are seeing growth of electric vehicles here. We have given about $100 million in incentives just in the last year or two to help build thousands of charging infrastructure here in Illinois. And so, not only for light vehicles, but we're seeing changes in school buses and heavy duty type vehicles. So that trend, I believe, is going to continue.
I've looked in your study that you've prepared to chart the future, and 50% of the grid demand growth that you see coming it will be attributable to data centers. That's something utilities around the country are facing. How is ComEd going to prepare for that growth, and what new tactics are you going to deploy?
That's an area where it's really amazingly, amazing in terms of growth here in our service territory. We are seeing close to between 30 and 40 gigawatts of applications in our pipeline. Throughout our history, Marty, our highest peak demand was set in July of 2011 at 23 gigawatts. It's almost twice our highest peak demand. And so what we're doing is, number one, we're making sure that our other customers are protected from speculative applications. So we have a filing with our commission here, our regulatory body, the Illinois Commerce Commission, to make sure that speculative applications do not put upward pressure on prices for the rest of our customers. We're also making sure that if those loads don't materialize, that the cost of improving the grid is not shifted to all of our other customers and that they are protected from stranded investment. But we're excited about the growth. They provide a lot of tax revenues. As you know, AI is a twofold thing for us. Number one, it's load, it's growth, but at the same time, AI itself, it's changing the way we design, operate, and maintain our grid.
I understand there are 80 data centers in your service territory. Is that density unique, or is that something utilities across the country are seeing?
There are very specific areas where data centers are converging. We are a top 5 market for data centers in the United States. There are others. Virginia, Northern Virginia, for example, is one. Georgia. We're seeing some in Ohio and in Arizona. So we are one of those areas where that's really attracting data center because, Marty, ComEd is the most reliable utility in the United States. We're number one, and we have had that status for a long time. You also know that there's a lot of baseload power here, primarily nuclear, but also other types of generation. So those things are reliable and durable grid, affordable grid with baseload supply and land to build different types of data center, make our market really a good place to locate these facilities.
Okay, so you continue to expect grid of evolution to deal with data centers, strong demand from 80 plus that you have now. You see your EVs, which are 135,000 in your service territory, continuing to grow, despite, I might point out, the disappearance of federal incentives. You have approval from the Illinois Commerce Commission of a multi-year grid plan for 24 to 27 of $1.4 billion. I want you to talk about that in two senses. One, you and I have chatted offline, and you think where you're headed, it puts you in the vanguard of all utilities. How does this plan put you there? And what are some of the high points of what you hope to achieve with this spending level? And I guess 3, how does that compare with past levels of spending in your grid?
Actually, Marty, we're now operating on our first grid plan approved by our regulators. That's from 2023 to 2027. We are about to file our second grid plan this January for the years 2028 to 2031. And that is why we have put forth a roadmap, a long-term strategy to really transform our grid to make it an integrated system where it is adaptive, it is responsive to not only the typical generation, transmission, and distribution, but all the customer assets, whether they're solar, their battery, their electric charging station, their electric vehicles, We want this dynamic, interactive grid that is affordable, but also spurs economic development and thriving communities in our service territory. We're so excited. This year alone, we're investing $3.2 billion in capital. And we project that capital spend is going to go up to $4 billion over the next 2 years. And our next grid plan, we want to make sure that we're prudent, that we're very selective with what we invest as we transform this grid, because we want our service to be affordable to all here in Illinois.
You said you're about to have more change in the next decade than the past century. How does this level of spending compare with past levels of spending?
It's more significant. Over the last 10 years, our peak capital expenditure was at about $2.6 billion a year. And as I had mentioned, we're 3.2 this year, growing to $4 billion a year. But what I want to emphasize is not just the amount of expenditures. It's what we're spending it on. It will be on new technologies that will make our grid more interactive, make our grid more flexible, make sure that we can integrate all distributed resources and clean energy sources with the existing assets that are already operating. Because what's important, Marty, is not just modernizing the grid for the sake of modernizing it. We want to create value for our customers, whether they're residential customers or commercial and industrial customers, and to make sure that we spur economic development here in our state.
So, Gil, making our conversation possible today and hosting our conversation is EPRI, which, as you know, is very closely working on new technologies of the future. Are there any technologies that you're particularly excited about that you just can't wait to unleash and deploy?
Yes. I think AI will power a lot of future technologies on the grid. I mentioned for the last 10 years, we've been installing smart switches and smart sensors and advanced metering infrastructure. But over time, when you layer AI, it becomes even more powerful in terms of managing. I'll give you an example. Right now, Marty, we can fly drones with high fidelity cameras, and they survey the top of our electric poles, and we can predict which poles we need to replace or not. In the past, you have to test each pole. We have to send somebody to test each pole. Now we can do that with drones and AI.
So before we leave that, let's talk about the implications. Does that mean you're going to have a more reliable grid because you're going to spot potential problems earlier and deal with them less expensively?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now we have advanced metering infrastructure with intelligence in it and AI in it, where we can predict transformers up in a pole. We can predict if they have an issue before they fail. And therefore, we can replace them before they fail and cause an outage in neighborhoods. So technologies like that are things that we are excited to deploy here in Illinois. And as you know, Marty, the fewer outages our customers have, the more avoided cost they experience. It's amazing. Lawrence Berkeley Lab have made calculations that I know that the amount of outages that we have avoided here in Northern Illinois have saved our customers billions of dollars. It's electricity, as you know, nowadays, it's the oxygen of society. Everything stops without it.
Talk about other features that you think this new grid will deploy. And will most of it not be evident to customers? Or, for example, will it allow more innovative time of day rate plans? what's customer facing that might be changing?
Another thing that we're experiencing here, Marty, is the growth of community solar. We have over 200 community solars installations here operating and growing. And what's great with that, as you know, not all homes, not all buildings are apt to put solar panels on the roof. So instead of that, they sign a subscription on this community solar and storage that help lower their bills and help make our grid more resilient. I think what you're going to see as we implement our plan is that all these distributed assets, whether they're behind the meter, solar and storage, or they're on the grid, utility scale storage, for example, or utility scale renewables, charging stations, what you will see is they will become part of our distribution operations, meaning that we will see them, we will be able to monitor them, and in conjunction and in partnership with our customers, we'll be able to control them and optimize the operation of our grid that will then create value for our customers.
Let's talk about solar. The aggregate solar production is 450 megawatts from these community solar projects?
Correct.
Is that right? Solar represents about 1% of your generation. Do you think you're going to have way more community solar out there? I know you just recently announced your first community solar paired with storage. Are you going to see more and more of that? And will it go down to the neighborhood level across Chicago? What will this enable you to do, and what do you envision happening?
We certainly are seeing more community solar in our territory, and I think that's just going to continue to grow. Illinois is the number one market for community solar, and we have a good regulatory structure and set of incentives to continue to spur that growth. Our state also recently passed, just a couple of weeks ago, an omnibus energy bill that will give additional incentives to storage, both utility scale and behind the meter storage. And I think that's also going to propel more solar and storage behind the meter, residential and commercial and industrial customers. So, we're excited. We're excited to be able to hook them up to our grid, and again, make sure that they're fully integrated and interactive with the way we operate the grid to create value for our customers and make sure that our service is affordable.
So you get about a third of the power you need from nuclear. You're the eldest child of Exelon, one of America's leading nuclear generators. Do you see a role for small modular reactors coming into your service territory?
I think eventually. EPRI's been looking at this and working with all of the utilities around the world, not just in the United States. I've been told by Arshad Mansour, the president of EPRI, that we probably need about 10 or 12 of these installations around the world that will then enable the standardization of the design. And once that design is standardized, then they can be deployed more widely.
Gil, you have 7,000 employees. In our careers, we've seen a major evolution of utility culture, workforce skills. How excited are you, and this is kind of a leading softball question, but how excited are you about the strategy you're putting in place as to what kind of workers you'll be attracting in the next decade or two?
Oh, this is no longer your grandfather's utility. It is such a high-tech sector now. The kind of technologies that we deploy, not just AI, the new materials that we use for transmission, distribution, substations, power electronics and sensors that we deploy to make the grid more resilient. Marty, there was a huge storm here last year, July of last year, where it knocked out 1 million of our customers. We had 43 tornadoes that went through our service territory. Yet, because of our smart switches and smart sensors, we were able to reroute power and isolate where the damages were, and very quickly reduce those outages from 1 million customers to 500,000. And based on that, we then sent out our line crews to fix them, but we were able to restore power within 3 days. Those are the kind of the kind of technologies that make our sector really exciting for the young people to join, because it's now such a high tech industry.
Talking about weather disruptions, do you continue to forecast, as you look at weather models, more virulent storms, longer summers, and how is that affecting your business?
Yeah, in fact, we have a joint work with Argonne National Lab, which is right here in our territory. They have great capabilities to model how our climate will evolve between now and 2050. And they're telling us at a high level that our service territory's climate will be more akin to central Missouri.
Right.
And because of that, we are now thinking about changing our design standards and construction standards. For example, the prediction is that our transformers are not going to be able to cool down the way they do today overnight. So we may have to increase the size of our transformers a little bit to accommodate that phenomenon. Another one, that because there will be more moisture here and warmer weather, that the bugs that normally eat our electric poles will be more plentiful, and therefore our cycle of changing poles may change, or we may need to start considering different type of materials for our poles. So we have the luxury of having a world-class national lab here who have the capabilities to model climate, and therefore we are making those adjustments because we invest in long-lived assets. When we put something in the ground, they last 10, 15, 20 years. We have to think about those decisions today. And ComEd probably is one of the leading utilities that that is employing that type of capability.
Let's take a minute and turn to microgrids. I've watched the birth of your Bronzeville neighborhood, and it's been a while. What have you learned from that experiment? What role will microgrids play in the strategy you're deploying?
Microgrids is going to be one of the configurations that will be in utility grid design. We're so proud of the Bronzeville microgrid. It's the largest neighborhood microgrid in the nation. What's cool about it is that it's also connected to the microgrid of Illinois Institute of Technology, which is also in the Bronzeville neighborhood, meaning that we created a brain, basically, with the help of Siemens and Department of Energy, so that the two microgrids can talk to each other seamlessly and can share resources. So it's going to fortify the resiliency of the grid in that neighborhood. And it's also a test bed for all the other technologies that we're looking to deploy for our customers system-wide.
I'd like you to get philosophical for a minute. As you deploy AI, as you build the grid of the next decade, it's going to give you a wealth of information that you have not had access to before in terms of minute trends and capabilities and problems. How is that going to challenge you as an executive team to take that information and use it most effectively?
I think the key first is to make sure that when we get the data sets that are going to be streaming, that we're able to curate them. That's the first step. You have to be able to curate and warehouse the data so that then you can apply AI and do the work of AI. I believe that many of the manual processes that we do today, whether it's engineering, whether it's IT related, will be more automated and more integrated. But the first thing we need to do is to take care of data governance and curating that data. And we're in the process of doing that here at ComEd, because we're really excited about deploying AI, and we're looking to make sure that we are creating applications not for the sake of technology and app, but they have to create real value for our customers, and they have to make our service better and more affordable.
As you become more dependent and utilize all these data sets and get smarter about your operations, you also open to vulnerabilities of cybersecurity. Are you having to step up that side of the house as well?
Absolutely. In our case, Marty, we're part of the Exelon family of utilities, right? Exelon is our parent company. We own the utilities in Washington, D.C., Maryland, Delaware, Atlantic City, Philadelphia, and here in Chicago and Northern Illinois. It is number one. We need to, number one, safety and security. And we are always investing in cybersecurity across the board, because we are a critical infrastructure. We're tied with the financial industry in terms of being a target by bad actors. And we can't let our guard down. We have to invest, and we are. We are investing in cybersecurity. We are working with other utilities and other technology companies, primarily through EPRI, but also through other organizations, so that we're one step ahead in that game.
So Gil, my final question to you is really summing up all that we've been talking about. What do you think, in this moment of time, with everything in flux, what are you most excited about? What is the prize you hope to seize, and the utility you hope to create with today's technologies? What is it going to look like? What is going to be like for you and your colleagues?
Well, what I'm most excited about, Marty, is how our customers will experience us. I'm trying to fast forward to 10 years from now. I think that they will experience us in a very, very different way. They will have a grid that is significantly more resilient and more responsive to their needs. They will have a grid that will enable them to work better and play better. They will have a grid that will help communities thrive. And so those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about something that will make and power the lives of citizens here in Northern Illinois in a very different way, very profoundly different way. And we are on our way there by investing in technology, by improving our processes. So in the end, yes, technology gets me excited. I'm an engineer. As you know, I'm a mechanical engineer. I love all this AI and all the sensors and switches. But it's the customer experience that excites me more. The possibilities that we can provide to all of our customers, whether they're residential customers, commercial and industrial customers. The promise of AI, we don't know yet all of what it can bring, but we're right in the middle of it. And so from being a president and CEO here at ComEd, I'm I'm excited just being part of this journey towards a safer, a more reliable, a more resilient, a more interactive and sustainable grid for all of our customers.
Thank you for joining Grid Talk. We're very excited to have you on our podcast, just on the cusp of some major announcements at ComEd in a matter of days that will rivet the entire industry, and people can turn to your conversation with me and get a flavor of just how high your expectations are. Thanks, Gil.
Good to be with you, Marty, as always.
To you, our listeners, thank you for joining in for a new rendition of Grid Talk. We're excited to be back in partnership with EPRI for a series of 5 podcasts exploring all the great changes taking place in the electric grid. Next up, Samantha Gilman, Communications Manager of EPRI, is going to sit down with Morgan Scott, EPRI Vice President of Global Partnerships and Outreach, to talk about the high points and the takeaway that they have from my wide-ranging conversation with Gil Quiniones, the ComEd President and CEO. Please stay tuned and watch for future podcasts, and we'll see you then.
Hello and welcome to EPRI's Take, part of our new series, Grid Talk on the EPRI Current. After several years at DOE, Grid Talk and host Marty Rosenberg are joining the EPRI Current for 5-episode series highlighting and discussing key themes with executives from across the energy sector. Then, here on EPRI's Take, hosted by myself, Samantha Gilman, we'll provide some quick feedback and perspective on what we heard and what we've been seeing in the industry. As our first guest, I'm joined by Morgan Scott, Vice President of Global Partnerships and Outreach here at EPRI. Morgan, we just listened to the conversation between Marty and ComEd's CEO, Gil Quiniones. Any initial thoughts?
Yeah, well, greetings, Samantha, from NARUC here in Seattle. And I think my initial thoughts are, man, is there a topic that Marty and Gil didn't cover? There's really so much here that we could unpack and react to. So let's jump right into the conversation.
Amazing. So, as you said, lots going on in that conversation. And one of the things Gil mentioned is ComEd is managing up to 40 gigawatts in data center applications, nearly double its historical peak. What are you seeing across the industry in terms of how utilities and regulators are responding to this kind of huge demand, and what innovative approaches or planning frameworks are emerging?
Yeah, I mean, it's massive. I think one thing I really appreciated from Gil was that he contextualized, right? So yes, they're seeing a ton of growth from data centers, but it's also electrification. It's also large industry from onshoring. So there is just a massive kind of growth here, and that they're not alone. So I'm hearing from a lot of other utilities that they're seeing this kind of growth. So what does that mean? I think there's still questions about what's real, right? So a lot of questions around, is the queue correct? And how do you actually find the signal from the noise as you're thinking about planning realistically? I think that's a conversation which will continue. Here at NARUC, I'm listening to a lot of sessions that are looking at demand growth and really thinking about what does that mean for customers and making sure that, costs remain reasonable for customers as we think about the value of the grid. So some really important conversations there. And then, from the EPRI perspective, we talk a lot about flexibility right now. So how do we think about data centers and sort of move it from grid risk to an actual grid resource, right? What is actually capable in terms of flexibility, and what can we enable to help move those queues along and really kind of think about the data center working with the grid over time. So I think that's one we're going to see continue to unfold as well.
You're right. We cannot get through an episode without talking about data centers. Now, in addition to that, Marty and Gil talked about grid modernization. Now, ComEd is working on redesigning its grid using climate modeling from Argonne National Lab, someone I know we've collaborated with in the past. Given your past leadership with EPRI's Climate Ready, how does this approach align with what you're seeing elsewhere in the industry? And are there any examples of climate-informed grid improvements that you've seen or would like to share?
Yeah, so I think what Gil described is exactly in line with what we envision with the Climate Ready framework. It really is about how do you take information about weather as it is today, as well as projected weather, and how do you integrate that into the investments that are being made across the power systems? And that's both in terms of vulnerability, right? Identifying the vulnerabilities, as well as thinking about new assets, which I want to come back to. But I really appreciated what Gil shared, right? So he mentioned like new poles and using sensors and different ways to kind of add automation to the grid, which is building resilience in. I think all of those are really things that we are seeing. But I also want to make clear it's not one size fits all, right? So climate can be hyper local, and therefore companies need to really think about what are their exposures to different weather events. What does that actually mean in terms of potential vulnerability? And then what are the appropriate kind of methods that can be taken to mitigate for that? I also want to come back to that point. You know, Gil mentioned billions of dollars being invested every year. And one thing that we've been talking about from the Climate Ready perspective is this difference between assessing vulnerabilities and investing to address those versus climate-informed planning. And so one thing I've been thinking a lot about as we talk about the grid of the future in consideration of all this load growth, back to your first question, is how do we just kind of build from the start, whatever we're doing, whatever investment we're making, how do we just incorporate weather into that so that we build resilience in from the start? I really hope that this is something that continues to be discussed, and it needs to be both. What are the vulnerabilities and how do we address them? But also, how do we build resilience in from the start is something I hope we continue to discuss.
Well, Morgan, thank you for taking a few minutes to join me on EPRI's Take, all the way from Nehru. And for our listeners, thanks for joining us for the first episode of Grid Talk on the EPRI Current, and we'll talk to you next time.